And they play some beats and they're like, yo, what artist you think can get on this? And be honest with you, I just tell them like, hey, I don't think nobody's gonna get on this right now, especially anybody who's a little younger. And then they look at me with this crazy face like, what do you mean? Like, this is classic hip hop. This is real music.
Yeah, and I didn't like classic hip hop when I was a kid. I didn't like classic hip hop when I was a kid. So why would these kids like it now? Shoot.
Older producers can be stubborn.
I liked hip hop with what Timbo was doing. I liked hip hop with what Pharrell was doing. And you know what's funny? I mentioned the first album that I ever bought. First hip hop album anyway. Jay-Z Volume 2. Who produced that? Who was one of the main producers on there? Let y'all do your research. So I was always looking for people that were pushing the envelope. They were doing something new. They were changing the sound. I didn't like listening to, this is classic. Well, stick with it. Then go play your classic shit. Go play your classic shit. There's plenty of classic. That's why it's called classic. It already exists. You could go listen to it. Why are you making something that already exists? Like, we should be making the new classic. Like, what's the next classic? It ain't gonna be an old classic. You're making useless music. You're making useless music. I'm bringing back, stop bringing nothing back. The only person that can bring anything back is Justin Timberland with Justin Timberland. That's hilarious. The only person bringing anything back is Justin Timberlake with Timberland. Those are the only people allowed to bring anything back. Stop trying to bring back nothing else.
Let's just talk about the older producers, because there are two types of older producers. The kinds of older producers who embrace changes in music and embrace new music, new generation sounds, and then the older producers who completely resist anything new.
I've always battled against this even when I was a kid. People from my generation will even attest to this, because you could even see it in the comment that DJ Payne 1 showed. His comment said, dang, I can't believe a 40-year-old is producing something that sounds like this. Our generation, being 40, boom bap still sounded old to us. Okay? Like, boom bap sounded old to us. So I never liked boom bap. I'm from that generation and I don't like boom bap. I know the kid was trolling at the beginning of this video, but I actually feel that way. I hate it. It's disgusting to me. Most hip hop I don't like. So let me lose a bunch of subscribers real quick. I like music. When I started getting into hip hop, my older half brother, he played Tupac for me, some West Coast. I was like, I like his voice. His voice is dope. Dad won't let me listen to this because he's cursing too much. But the beats, they were lame to me. Like, I didn't like the beats. I was never a Dr. Dre fan until Eminem. And I've lived in Michigan. I'm not from Detroit. I am from the Midwest though. But it was the production that he gave Eminem that made me fall in love with Dr. Dre. Sonically, bar none, like no one was doing what Dre was doing. And it made me go back and appreciate the early West Coast sound as well. Appreciate it. I still didn't like it for my taste, but I appreciated it and the vibe that it gave. But I was never into that vibe, you know? I was never into that for listening to music. That being said, GNX, I might have recorded a video. Maybe I'll drop in that clip because I probably won't do it justice with what I'm about to say now. But GNX, yes, like, wow. Like, I literally said, wow. I did not know West Coast beats could sound like that. Like, wow, finally. Like, they modernized it. And I don't even want to say modernized it because in my head, West Coast could have sounded like that back in West Coast days. But to me, there just wasn't enough. Like, the reason it wasn't, I think there just wasn't enough producers producing West Coast music. There was a lot more of, back when, like I said, when I finally did start listening to music, it was because of guys like T.I. It was because of Jeezy. Jay-Z back in the day. The first album I ever bought was Jay-Z Volume 2. So I was definitely more into the East Coast sound. Biggie, Diddy. Yeah, maybe not so much anymore. But yeah, I was definitely more into the East Coast sound. I lived in Virginia for a while. So Pharrell, Timbaland. I mean, come on, y'all. Like, I was into the musicality of things. And when East Coast production would sample music, it wasn't always soul, you know, it wasn't always Jay Dilla drums, you know, like they would mix it up. Like there would be synths, there would be bells, there would be other sounds, and no one did that better than the South. No one did it better than the Dirty South. You had the Runners, you had Manny Fresh, you had Shoddy Red. Like, man, so many producers that were incorporating a lot of other instrumentation into their beats. Just really loved the fact that it didn't sound like a loop. Like they were adding sections into their songs, you know, like there were different parts, different moments, different ways to feature artists. I liked the exploration of combining genres that way rather than, hey, I'm going to take a soul sample and put these soul drums on it. Like you're trying to sound old. I only like the old stuff when you try to make it sound new and fresh.
Every single decade, there's a different wave all the time.
I definitely agree. And I feel like once we get into a 20-year time gap, that's when people start looking at going from, okay, that's classic to, hey, that's retro. And I think that's where we're at with the early 2000s where, you know, the Roland Phantoms and the Silence and the sounds that are coming out of Xenology are retro or have that retro vibe to them. And people are gravitating towards that because those are the sounds that they used to hear on the radio when they were listening to hip hop, listening to trap, listening to literally the most popular genre in the history of the world. So that's, you know, we got to remember that, you know, hip hop didn't get to where it was at until trap music came into play. And, you know, I know that will be controversial for people, but it's the truth. 50 Cent was one of the biggest rappers in the world with that West Coast sound, but it was that West Coast sound after Eminem, right? Like it was after it progressed into, man, I really like these beats now. Like, I don't care. I'll argue with people all day long. Like I know what I hear. The beats got better, and I know people will love that classic old school Dre or whatever, but you know, it wasn't until Eminem and 50 Cent where I actually started loving the production of what Dr. Dre was doing. And that sound is not, I wouldn't consider that you know, classic West Coast, right? So I'm always looking for people pushing the envelope and changing up the sound. And yeah, I feel like it's hard to do with just classic hip hop because in my head, classic hip hop is just New York, you know, just straight up New York 80s. And it's, I don't know, that sound was dead to me while I was growing up. Like, you know, the Will Smith style of rap. Like I didn't like listening to Will Smith except for, you know, if he would come out with a movie, I might listen to the soundtrack. Wild Wild West, you know, Men in Black. But other than that, I wasn't, you know, out here buying old school classic sounding hip hop albums. I was buying what was considered the new classics, and that's Jay-Z Volume 2, The Blueprint, Graduation, Late Registration. And that's, you know, we're talking about non-trap, right? But all of that was happening when trap was starting to come into play. Not Jay-Z Volume 2 and Blueprint and all that, but when hip hop started becoming global. It was right when trap was coming into play, because now you had the Europeans dabbling in the trap sound, and that's how we got the EDM trap, which I absolutely despise. I hate that sound. I hate it. You got to develop your taste somehow, and the way you develop your taste is figuring out what you don't like and figuring out what you like. So if you're out here offended by me saying I hate this sound or that sound, then you're not really an artist, are you? You're not really into music. Like you gotta hate something. You know, you got to figure out what you actually have a taste in. And you could appreciate other things too. Like I said, even though you don't like it, because I didn't like West Coast and I can appreciate West Coast.